According to Merriam-Webster, diplomacy means skill in handling affairs without arousing hostility. This is what diplomacy is supposed to do, and this is what it does. Why would there even be a without arousing hostility at the end if that's not true? Hello, I'm Pro, and I'm here to affirm the resolution because of economic diplomacy, power vacuums, and motivation for terrorist groups. Contention 1, economic diplomacy. There are two ways this can work. The first is through economic interdependence. One of the official definitions of interdependence is from Merriam-Webster. The dependence of two or more things on each other. Therefore, economic interdependence would be the reliance of two or more countries on each other for a good economy. And no one wants to mess up a good economy. This is seen even in the smallest of places. Suppose you have a lemonade stand. You don't want to upset your customers because then they might not buy your lemonade, and then you might run out of money. On a grander scale, take the US and China, two countries with conflicting government structures, and one of them having little relevance until around 2 decades ago. According to government statistics, China is now 14.6% of the US's total trade, only second to Canada. Both depend on each other to earn money, and without one, no profit for the other. The second way this can work is through sanctions. For example, in 2015, 6 world powers joined together and put sanctions on Iran, hoping to curb its nuclear program. And according to NPR, the sanctions on oil crippled the economy, causing inflation rates to rise, and opened up discussions for Iran's nuclear program. And many people agree that without the sanctions, the negotiations cannot have happened. Contention 2, military force creates power vacuums. If the U.S. puts its forces in an area that has a fragile government structure, then what happens when they withdraw those forces, or those forces happen to fail? Because it becomes extremely likely for a group to seize power afterwards. And usually that group is not who you want in charge. According to an interview on therealnews.org, this has happened in Iraq. Ever since 2003, Iraq has been totally dependent on the U.S. for security, and Army and Marine Corps people have been allowed to make decisions and were a section of the political. It helped it moved along political arguments, and by removing people that have that large of a position internally, then that really that decreases made it a lot easier for ISIS to get large territorial gains, which isn't exactly peace. And in contention 3, military force motivates terrorist groups. According to Robert A. Pape from Foreign Policy, each month there are more attacks on American forces in U.S.-occupied Middle Eastern countries than there have been in all the years before 2001 combined. The same article says that from 1980 to 2003, there are 343 suicide attacks around the
keep going.
around the globe, 10% of which were anti-American, which increased to over 90% of which were anti-American after 2004. This just shows that American occupation and long-term American occupation motivates attacks by people who are dissatisfied living in that group.
Okay. 20.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
23.
Okay, so your first contention was about economic diplomacy and sanctions, I believe?
Yeah.
So my group disagrees because sanctions are hard power since they are direct action.
So you disagree with the sanctions part?
Yeah.
Well, they have to go through courts and other procedures to be acted upon, and they're not exactly a military force, so I disagree with that being hard power.
Can you repeat that?
They have to go through courts and other procedures to be acted upon, and they aren't exactly controlled by the military, so I disagree with it being a hard power.
Okay. For your third contention, you stated that military force motivates terrorist groups. That was your, okay. So on the opposite side, diplomacy doesn't exactly solve that problem. So how can you attack our side if you can't, diplomacy, terrorists doesn't even have like, your side can't solve the problem of terrorists either. So how can you attack us on that?
Well, that just because if our side can't solve it, that doesn't mean that your side can solve it. 100.
Yeah, but when considering both diplomacy and military power, what would you say is better when dealing with terrorists? Would it be diplomacy? Because using diplomacy against terrorists means that you're giving them, like, you're paying attention to them. You're making their voice larger than it's supposed to be. If you're using military power, it might actually, like, prove to be useful. So, yeah.
Well, military power also addresses them and makes them seem more important too.
But at the same time, it's taking action. Diplomacy addresses them and gives them power, but it's not taking action. Whereas when military power does it.
I have never felt any sort of fondness for war, and I have never advocated it except as a means of peace. Today, my partner and I will be debating the topic that military power better helps maintain peace than diplomacy. Contention 1. Military power as deterrence. According to NATO Review magazine, deterrence is a threat of force in order to discourage an opponent from taking an unwelcome action. This can be achieved through the threat of retaliation, that is, deterrence by punishment, or by denying the opponent's war aims, that is, deterrence by denial. One such type of deterrence is nuclear weapons. According to the Washington Post, Robert Spalding says that nuclear weapons are an instrument of peace. The United States won the Cold War by maintaining a credible nuclear force to stand against a stronger force. Missile-equipped submarines, the bombers, and the intercontinental ballistic missiles were the three key weapons that deterred the Soviets from attacking. These forces were at the forefront of the defense strategy during the Cold War. Robert Spalding also said that since 1945, 7 million to 10 million people have died in wars. But in only 2 world wars, 70 to 100 million people died. Nuclear weapons are scaring countries into submission. According to Brookings, Richard Bush, Vanda L. Bob Brown, Martin S. Indyk, Michael E. O'Hanlon, and Stephen Pfeiffer, and Kenneth M. Pollack explain that when a country builds up powerful nuclear forces that could threaten any potential aggressor, there are many risks and high costs. According to the official NATO website, NATO's primary role is to protect peace and to guarantee the territorial integrity, political independence, and security of the member states. NATO conducts military exercises to demonstrate capability and to deter and maintain peace effectively. As shown in the evidence above, military deterrence better helps maintain peace. Contention 2. Diplomacy doesn't work with terrorism. In fact, negotiating with the terrorist organizations give them a status. According to Daniel Greenfield, a Shulman journalism fellow at the Freedom Center at Front Page Mag, says that negotiating with terrorists doesn't work unless they intend to stop being terrorists. The reason that peace doesn't exist between Israel and the Palestine Authority is because it's run by high-profile leaders of a terrorist group. As explained in Brookings by Richard N. Haas, it is always difficult to achieve peace with terrorist organizations or head of states who are authoritarian or dictators. For example, even after trying diplomacy for 6 months, it took Operation Desert Storm, a use of military action, to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. The United States also unsuccessfully tried to use diplomacy with the Taliban to cut ties with al-Qaeda. According to the American Enterprise Institute, efforts to negotiate with the Taliban did not just fail, they also strengthened the terrorist organization and further destabilized Afghanistan. Between 1994 and 2001, the Taliban used diplomacy as an instrument to further its military agenda. According to the Institute of Economics and Peace, the number of deaths resulting from terrorism increased by 80% in 2014 compared to the prior year. Since the beginning of the 21st century, there has been over a 9-fold increase in the number of deaths from terrorism. This is the world we live in today, where terrorism is a global threat and diplomacy cannot maintain peace. Based on the evidence above, we strongly urge a con ballot. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Okay, so what was the statistic for the more deaths after 2014?
Based from terrorism, there was 80% more deaths in 2014 compared to the prior year.
Why 2014?
Because it's one of the statistics that's closest to 2017.
No, I mean, like, why did it increase so much from 2013?
Because because we've been we haven't been using our military action so much in 2014.
So, when you say that nuclear weapons are an item of peace, how usually they're seen as items of war, and how, other than deterrence, how are they items of peace?
Well, during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, the key military strategy was mutual assured destruction, or MAD. According to the Brookings Institute, MAD worked and kept the United States and Soviet Union from an all-out war and no death toll.
Yes, but are there any other ways?
The arms race that occurred between the United States and the Soviet Union, they reduced the chances of war outbreak and improved the military technology.
Okay. Do you agree that when there's deterrence, there's usually a lot of tension?
Yes.
And so how tension usually leads to conflict. So,
like I said in MAD, if one country, so mutual assured destruction is if when one country fires at another, then the country, they're not gonna just sit there. They're gonna come and fire back. So that's how it maintains peace.
During the debate, our opponents have stated 3 different contentions. Our opponent's first contention was about economic diplomacy. They also stated that nobody wants to mess with a strong country. This is untrue. Sometimes when a country is strong, other strong countries want to mess with them. Also, stating that nobody wants to mess with a strong country promotes our side, as it has to do with military deterrence. Our opponent's second contention was that our opponent's third contention was that military force motivates terrorist groups. During cross-examination, we responded with, well, diplomacy doesn't exactly solve the problem. Also, the opponent's team argued that diplomacy works better with terrorists. No, diplomacy doesn't work with terrorism at all. In fact, this was our second contention. Diplomacy just gives terrorists attention. Our opponents have failed to answer properly during cross-examination. Thus, we have succeeded in attacking their case.
Pro-prep? Sorry. Yeah, for cross-examination.
Opponents ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so in your attack speech, you said that sometimes strong countries mess with other strong countries.
Yes, that was a direct quote from...
So who was that quoted from?
That was a direct quote from what you said. I wrote it down when you were stating your essay. Or your thing.
Okay, then you also said that diplomacy doesn't work with terrorism.
It doesn't.
Could you expand on that?
Well, when you are using diplomacy against terrorists, you aren't taking action, and second of all, you're giving the terrorists attention. You're basically just telling the world about what their intention is.
Is trying to negotiate with them not an action taken upon them?
Not really.
Not
Terrorists don't negotiate.
And
if you can't tell.
Where do you have that information? Where did you get that
We have tried to negotiate with ISIS terrorist group. How would you propose that we negotiate with the terrorist group? Do we send them a letter or something?
Well, this is my time to ask you a question, so I'm going to continue.
Okay.
Also, you said that military power better helps to deal with terrorism. So why is that true?
Military power better helps to deal with terrorism because you're using direct force. In fact, military deterrence can...
you also said
let me finish. Military deterrence can often scare a terrorist group because you have those weapons, you have those materials that they might be scared of you.
Okay, but didn't you say that deterrence won't like actually let the tension have an impact because two countries know
Wait,
that
what do you
if
mean by-
one launches a bomb at another one, they're both going to get destroyed because the other one's going to fire back. So why would using a military against a terrorist not have the same effect? Because the terrorists are going to fire back too.
Using a military against terrorists would not have the same effect as diplomacy, because diplomacy is just stating something.
So in your first contention, you said that nuclear weapons are used as a source of deterrence. But doesn't this also mean that the people who are afraid of you because of you using nuclear weapons as a source of deterrence cause them to not want to trade to you? And that's also the same thing. You basically supported what I just said with another point you made in your first contention when you said that nuclear weapons keep people in submission. This means that they don't want anything to, like, they don't want to negotiate with the people that they're scared of, so they go into submission. So that means that the country using deterrence with nuclear weapons is going to lose their a source of their trade, and that's going to cause them to lose some of their money. And in your second contention, you said that it's difficult to achieve peace with terrorists when using diplomacy, but you never really gave any support or any like well-rounded reasons to explain why military hard power would actually do something to stop them or even have an impact. And you also said that there was an 80% increase of terrorism deaths from 2014 to the year before that. But how do you know that that's fully because of the military? How do you know that that wasn't because there was an increase in terrorists or terrorism or terrorist groups? You also said that there was tension with deterrence, and my partner said that that could lead to conflict, but again, you didn't respond to that directly.
No, you have a minute 26 still.
Oh, okay. And you didn't respond to this point directly, which shows that you don't have an answer to this question. So this point is something that you just can't respond to.
Cross-examination?
Okay, so are you aware that you know that America's been building nuclear weapons, right?
Yeah.
We have some. And we still trade with China, am I correct?
Yeah.
So that just proves my point. Like, we still are trading with countries, because those countries know that we wouldn't risk our trade with attacking them. So like, it's only the countries that we don't like, or groups like terrorist organizations.
Did you ever directly put on the feeling of doubt or fear directly to China?
No, I'm asking a question.
Okay.
So no, because so you attacked our second contention by saying we didn't have any proof. I'm just clarifying. We didn't have any proof
About what? You have to be specific.
about hard power stopping the terrorists. Is that what you?
Yeah.
Okay, and what was the second part? Like, how did you? So you attacked us in two ways, right? Our second contention.
Yeah.
What was the second way?
The second way was that you said that there was an 80% increase of terrorism deaths, and I said that you don't know if that's directly because of the government not using their military power to the fullest. So that's how I attacked it.
Okay, that's it.
Pro. Do you have prep time?
Yeah, can I have 30 seconds? Okay, that's enough.
Okay. You only took 10 seconds. Wait 1 second, guys.
So in their first attack on our first contention, they said that, well, just to clarify, I did not say that no one wants to mess with a strong country. I said no one wants to mess up a good economy. Sorry for not enunciating that. But yeah, and so in their attack on our third contention, they said that diplomacy does not help terrorism either, and diplomacy instead just gives them attention. But terrorist groups already have attention and a status. You see them on the media, you see news everywhere, and it's unlikely that it can really raise the status much higher than it already is. So that's not really a risk for diplomacy anymore. And hard power hard power doesn't solve the terrorist problem either. Even so, if both of them don't solve it, I guess you'll just have to find a mix between the two or something like that. It still proves that hard power doesn't solve it. So it's just saying that diplomacy doesn't solve it and does not address the evidence that we have that hard power doesn't solve it. They also do not say anything about our second contention about how military force creates power vacuums, which don't usually lead to peace. And I would just like to point that out before I say, because of these reasons, hope you vote for a pro-ballot.
Con. Prep time?
Can we use 1 minute?
Yeah. A minute used.
Okay.
Great, so you guys are gonna have 1:37 left.
My time starts now. Our opponents attacked our first contention by saying that countries will stop trade with the U.S. when we start building nuclear weapons. That is not true because the U.S. has been building nuclear weapons, and we still have trading with China and many other countries. And they attacked our second contention by saying that the military will not stop terrorism, but and they said that in their defense speech, they said that there'll be a mix of two, but actually diplomacy won't work at all. If you talk, there's no one to talk to about peace to a terrorist organization, and when you talk to them, you're giving them a status, but the hard power will work. You're using it's an effective way to get terrorists to stop. That's how we got Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. We had to use Operation Desert Storm. And so we defended both of our contentions, and this is why we urge a con ballot.
Overall, our contentions were not attacked well, and we fully defended our opponents' weak and unsupported attacks. Our opponents also only focused on our third contention, but said nothing in response to our first and second contention, which were about diplomacy and power vacuums. This shows that our opponents failed to even say a single thing about over half of our reasons. With our defended points about terrorism and our points that were unattacked, our points are still strong and valid. Our unattacked points outweigh our opponents' attacked points, so please vote pro.
My time starts now. In the end, we have won the debate because we have provided a viable argument that has been backed up with supporting evidence from credible sources. Our first contention stated that hard power as military deterrence has prevented conflict in the past. During the debate, our opponents stated that people are afraid of you can not want to trade with you. We respond to this argument by asking, how can fear lead to a lack of trade? If you are scared, you would do whatever the country asks. Why would you impose sanctions on a country that you're scared of? Our second contention stated that diplomacy doesn't work when it comes to terrorism. During the debate, our opponent stated that we didn't give any support, that diplomacy doesn't work with terrorism. We responded to this argument by saying, actually, we did show evidence. Our second contention, as we stated, was that diplomacy doesn't work when it comes to terrorism. We had full-fledged evidence in the third paragraph of our case. Ultimately, we were able to defend both of our statements adequately and appropriately. During cross-ex, the opposing team failed to argue against us. Their contentions were unclear. They also said that terrorism was a result of war and that power vacuums lead to terrorism. It's not true because most terrorist groups exploit poverty, oppression, and regional instability for their nefarious ends. There are also examples of India and Pakistan, Israel and Palestinian Authority, where they are fighting over land and terrorist groups are exploiting these conflicts. Our contentions made sense and supported our thesis statement as well. Thus, the con team has won the debate.